This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business, politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, our guest is Professor Rahul Mukherji, who's a professor and head of the Department of Political Science at the South Asia Institute, University of Heidelberg, Germany. As you all know, that South Asian Institute is one of the oldest and best known South Asia Institute in the world. So, Professor Mukherji, thank you for coming to our show. It's wonderful to have you on our show. And I will start by saying thank you very much for being part of this interview. Thank you.
My pleasure indeed.
Professor Mukherji, please tell us about yourself to our global audience. And the question that I have also, in addition to that, we are wondering why a South Asian Institute is set up in Germany, and what are the goals and objectives and the mission of this institute? As we all know, people describe Germany as a land of ideas, right?
Yeah, so you see, I am an Indian who is now the executive director of the South Asia Institute. Let me tell you that the executive directorship of the South Asia Institute is by rotation. Of course, the director does get elected by the professoriate, but almost every professor is a director at some point in time. So the institution of the professor in Germany is very, very highly respected. How did I get to Heidelberg? Not by plan. I was born and brought up in India. I got my master's degree and my MPhil from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. And then I got a PhD in political science from Columbia University in New York. I also taught in the United States very briefly. And then I went back to teach in India, and I taught at the Center for Political Studies at the Nehru University in Delhi. Subsequently, for 8 years, I was at the National University of Singapore, working with their South Asia program, as well as the Institute of South Asian Studies. And at a certain point in time, when I visited Heidelberg to give a lecture at the Institute, which, like you, I had a very high regard for, I was encouraged to apply for the vacant professorship. And it so happened that, that I did not quite expect that it will happen, because I didn't have much of a continental experience, but was welcomed very, very warmly to the professoriate. And that is how in 2016, I assumed the chair of the modern politics of South Asia at the University of Heidelberg. And I assumed directorship 2 years ago. But that, as I was mentioning to you, is a kind of rotating position. And we work very collegially inside the Institute. Now, how did the Institute come about? Very interesting. It seems that in the early 1960s, and I have this from discussions with my colleagues, and a very fine piece written by my colleague, the geography professor Marcus Musa, Germany was planning to set up institutes on the developing world. And Baden-Württemberg is the province where Heidelberg is located. Baden-Württemberg is somewhat like the Silicon Valley of Germany. This is where Mercedes is manufactured. This is where SAP has its headquarters. Germany is very understated. Unless you really dig, you don't know what's happening where. But this is a very, very productive part of Germany. And Heidelberg, as you know, has a very, very fine scholarly reputation. So you have philosophers like Hegel, the founder of the sociology profession like Max Weber, and there are many, many luminaries who have taught in Heidelberg. Heidelberg and Frankfurt are, because Frankfurt is not in the province of Baden-Württemberg.
And how far is Heidelberg from Frankfurt, Professor Mukherji?
It's about 90 kilometers.
Oh, it's not
90
that far.
kilometers. So the airport, the airport is Frankfurt for us.
Okay, I got you.
So in that milieu, in Baden-Württemberg, the capital is Stuttgart, where Mercedes is manufactured. There was this idea that they want to set up an institute in Heidelberg University. And I think development was one of the things that they were very interested in. And I think it would be an interdisciplinary institute. But you must also recognize that Heidelberg had a very, very strong tradition in Indological study. So to begin with, the idea was that Heidelberg will be an Indo-Asia institute. It will be a very Indo-centric institute. However, the university consulted the then Indian president, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, the philosopher, and he recommended that it cannot be an Indian institute because this is a region, it has to be a South Asia institute. So paradoxically, in those days, the Indian president said that you must actually include all the other countries. And then the institute began in the 1960s. It had a view that there should be 14 professorships, of which only 8 materialized.
Okay.
So the real professorships that happened were in the area of economic development, anthropology, geography, history, Indology, international development and agriculture policy, political science, and even tropical hygiene and health. There used to be a department of tropical hygiene, which is today got converted into a very famous Heidelberg Institute for Public Health, which is actually world-renowned, but it actually emerged out of a department of this institute. So as you can see, it is very interdisciplinary. It is not just Indological. There is development economics, there is international development, there is political science, there is even medicine, there is history, geography, anthropology. And apart from these 8 professorships, there were also kind of temporary departments without full professors in modern languages and literature, archaeology, art history, religious studies, and law. And modern languages now has become an established department within the institute. Tropical medicine has actually moved to become another institute. So we are now an institute which has from classical languages, which is Indological studies, to modern languages, history, anthropology, geography, development economics.
So it's a pretty robust place.
So we are not only robust, we are actually perhaps the only one of its kind in the world, because if you look at South Asia institutes in America, they are generally adjuncts to departments.
Right.
Whereas here, the institute itself performs the role of the teaching regarding that area.
Okay.
And of course, we are also connected with the faculty. So for example, my chair is connected with economics and social science. The history chair is connected with the faculty of philosophy. So we are connected with different faculties. Nevertheless, we are an institute where our professorships are in that institute, not in any other department. And that belongs to the study of South Asia.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
In that sense, we have a unique mandate. Yes.
You sure do. So what are the institute's main areas of research? And as I understand, you have a Bangladesh chair, a Sri Lanka chair, but not an India chair, because as I understand, President Radhakrishnan said that it would be good to have a South Asia center. Is that the reason why? Which is sort of curious.
No. We do have an India chair. In fact, once again, I must say that the South Asia Institute is very well endowed, even by South Asian government. So we have an Iqbal chair.
So the money comes from where? How is it sustainable? It comes from the university, right?
No, so actually different chairs have different arrangements. So for example, we have a chair which is a joint arrangement between the university and the Indian Council of Cultural Relations. It's called the Heinrich Zimmer chair. The Heinrich Zimmer chair was named after perhaps one of the greatest Indologists who had to flee Germany during the Second World War and then taught at Columbia University for many years. The Heinrich Zimmer chair is more in intellectual history. And that chair has had very, very good, great occupants. But ever since the current dispensation came to power, we have not been able to come to an agreement about who should hold that chair. So that is why the chair remains vacant. It's not that we don't have it. We have it, and we have filled it with luminaries.
So
Similarly,
this,
we have we also have an Iqbal chair funded by the government of Pakistan. So
Bangladesh. What's your name? Allama Iqbal?
Iqbal, Allama Iqbal chair. Because as you know, Allama Iqbal lived in Heidelberg, and the government of Pakistan has endowed it. So we have also very good scholars coming in from Pakistan.
Very good.
And apart from these chairs, you know, I have received a scholar from Pakistan on German academic exchange. I have received scholars from India on German academic exchange. I have received scholars from the United States on the Humboldt Research Award. So these are not the only facilities that we have. But I must say that we have a chair, I think, from every country now, apart from Afghanistan, Nepal, and Bhutan.
Well, they cannot afford it, considering what's going on with the Afghanistan. I was in the board of Afghanistan American University in Afghanistan. So I want to change the subject. As you know, this institute is putting a lot of emphasis on the cultural and religious history of South Asia. How do you see the future of South Asian region when it comes to respect for human rights? And as we understand, this region is witnessing a growing dictatorship based on the religious and ethnic lines rather than a democratic rule. As you know, India is the largest democracy in the world. It has been and continues to be a beacon of hope for democracy around the globe. And the pillars of democracy: freedom of press, freedom of faith, freedom of religion, respect for human rights. Do you believe that South Asia need to promote inclusive democracy and equitable society?
Absolutely. I think it's very, very important, because my view is that that inherently South Asian culture, including Indian culture, is very, very inclusive. In fact, my Persian friends tell me that that the Persians look at India as a civilization, not as a nation. It has diverse strands that come together. So, of course, there are also strands that are fanatical, and they have always been there. They have expressed, they have raised their ugly head.
But it seems to me, what I hear, I do not know much about India, that Modi being silent on all the on the hatred and bigotry that's being promoted by the fanatics, as you said.
Yes, so Mr. Modi has not only been silent, he has also been quite active. And I have written some fairly clear and concise accounts of why I believe that the idea of India, which, however imperfect, was fairly inclusive, is being violated. And it is being violated in, you know, actions like the Citizenship Amendment Act. It is being violated in actions like the abrogation of Article 370 on Kashmir. It is being violated on, you know, the Foreign Currency Regulation, Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, amended in 2020, where a lot of non-governmental organizations today have been stripped of their right to get foreign funding. I do research in this area, so I can spend not 20 minutes, but half an hour telling you. But I think the point I want to make is that there are these two ideas of India. One idea of India and of Indian civilization, which I think is common to Gandhi, Nehru, and Subhash Chandra Bose as well, is that India is a civilization and it transcends Hindus, Muslims, Syrian Christians, Jewish people, Sikhs, and the like.
It transcends all religious boundaries. It transcends all religious boundaries.
It crosses all religious boundaries. And,
very well said.
And as a civilization, India has been able to live that life.
But
it is not that India has not been able to live that.
Yeah, but that obviously is a concern for this administration and the European Union as well.
Sure. So now what has happened is that every idea of a nation requires political parties, requires an institutional background with which you fight for that idea. So in the earlier times, the Congress party was the beacon light for fighting for that idea. I do think that the Congress party is still a beacon light, but it just lacks the kind of leadership it needs in order to promote that idea. On the other hand, what has happened is that the Bharatiya Janata Party, which also had some liberal-minded leaders, I would say that some of the actions of Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee far surpassed many of the Congress prime ministers. For example, Kashmiris felt far more at home with Prime Minister Vajpayee than they felt with even Rajiv Gandhi. However, the fact of the matter is that today the Bharatiya Janata Party is actually turning far more exclusivist, Hindu nationalist, and trying to make the argument that India is some kind of a homogeneous nation of a certain kind of people. And people have to fall in line with that idea. So this is actually coming through a kind of organization and a politics which seems to be overtaking the earlier organization and politics, which was able to promote the idea of inclusivity to a much greater extent. And I think even this is not without resistance, because if you've looked at the results of the elections in West Bengal, Mrs. Mamata Banerjee of the Trinamool Congress was able to comprehensively defeat the BJP at a time when the Prime Minister and the Home Minister himself parked themselves in the state. The farmers have actually made the Prime Minister repeal the 3 acts. In fact, the farmers are now going to agitate in Uttarakhand, in Punjab, and in Uttar Pradesh, where the 3 elections are going to be held. As we speak today, if you were talking to me 2 weeks ago, people would have been saying that Yogi Adityanath, who in my view could be even more dangerous than the Prime Minister himself, would surely win the elections. But today, it seems like it will not be so easy, because a lot of leaders of the BJP have now shifted and gone to the Samajwadi Party, which seems to be the very important party on the ground. So the only point I'm trying to make is that I have argued in my more serious writing, including a paper in the Journal of Democracy in October 2020, that India has turned competitive authoritarian. Competitive authoritarian doesn't mean that India has turned completely into an authoritarian regime. It means that leaders who have come to power through the democratic route are using the democratic route to gradually reduce the democratic institutions.
And also,
and I've argued that this has happened in India. However, I would qualify that by saying that having said that India has turned competitive authoritarian does not mean that India has lost all the capacity to resist authoritarianism.
Very well said.
So we are somewhere in that space. And I think for the entire region, India's democracy is very important, because it's not good for India-Pakistan relations, it's not good for India-Bangladesh relations, neither is good for India-Sri Lanka relations. So I think India has to stand up. It is very deeply challenged, but it is not completely beaten.
It's not lost. So I want to talk about South Asia. As you know, as you said, Professor Mukherjee, is extremely diverse with distinct religious and ethnic identities. Do you believe the delicate balancing of embracing the richness of religious diversity is now at increased risk? As you know, the diversity brings the people together. And when together, they can help shape a better future for India. And the way things are going, it looks like it's more polarized. It's just not the India, but the whole South Asian nation. And it weakens the democracy. And what do we need to do to pursue the common good to bring the people together?
Sure. I lost you a little bit in the middle, but I think I've got the question. I think it's very, very important today to fight for the inclusive idea of India. It's like, what does a nation stand for? Does the nation stand for Hindus, or does the nation stand for a diversity of cultures which can be called India. I have a feeling that Mohandas Gandhi's project was that. Mohandas Gandhi's project was that India is a civilization which cannot be understood in the context of a narrow nation. And that idea was invested in the organization of the Congress Party itself. So the Congress Party became a very well organized, a very well oiled organization, which also had support from Indian entrepreneurs. And with that organization, when Gandhiji was assassinated by a Hindutva nationalist, what happened was that the idea that India is an exclusivist country was put into the waste paper basket for some time. Now, the point is that the organizations that have upheld the inclusive idea have somehow become weak. And it is very, very important to strengthen those organizations through social movements, through political action. And I think some of that is happening. I've just written an opinion piece on the farmers' movement. If you read that piece, you will see how I have argued that the farmers have cut across caste, class, and religion to come together to fight in a manner that Mr. Modi, who was calling the farmers anti-national a couple of months ago, has actually had to repeal those three acts. And between November 19th, 2021 and January 2021, he was not even willing to negotiate. But when the farmers stood firm, Mr. Modi understood that it will have such a negative impact on elections in Western UP, Punjab, and Uttarakhand that he had to withdraw. And it is anybody's guess that after having withdrawn these bills, whether or not the BJP will win these elections. That is where I say that there is a difference between Bangladesh and India. In Bangladesh, in many constituencies, opposition parties are not able to stand for elections. Whereas in India, I would say the Election Commission is not performing at its best. It is not completely compromised, but opposition politicians can win elections. So there is something to be said about strengthening political parties and strengthening organizations that drive home the point in a very, very clear way that what is India? Is it an exclusivist country? And also this argument has to be made very, very strongly that this goes against the millennial culture of India. Because if this was such an acceptable idea in India, I think Mr. Modi with 80% Hindus would have easily been winning elections, right? So a whole lot of Hindus are not voting for Mr. Modi. Otherwise, how could Mr. Modi be losing elections? Just on the basis of dividing the population between Hindus and Muslims. So there is in the soil of India still resilience, but it has to be organized much better in order to challenge this delicate social balance that you are saying,
very well
which
said.
has been sought to be upturned.
So do you see a brighter horizon when you're enduring the storm? What's going on? Just not India. I think that Pakistan has a similar situation of problems, and the other countries as well. But India should be the model for people to imitate, and that has not been obviously people are concerned about that model yet. And then I want to talk about China has expanded its influence in countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bhutan. Do you believe that China's rise diminished the West's leverage in the region in promoting the value-based society? You know, China has no respect for human rights. It's a dictatorial society. So my question is, what are China's role in South Asia? Or what are the impacts of China's rising influence and its increasing role in Asia?
Okay, the first question, I do think India has to play a very, very important role. India cannot just be doing Pakistan bashing. You know, that's not going to save either India or Pakistan. India cannot just be saying that, you know, Hindus in Bangladesh are in a bad situation. India cannot be saying that, you know, please don't kill Sri Lankan Tamils, but we will lynch Muslims. So India is 70 to 75% of the geography, more than 80% of the economy. a country of 1.3 billion people with linkages with all the countries in terms of social and cultural relationships. So I think India is critical. And therefore, for me, the most important country that has to reform, much before we begin to think about China's influence, is India itself. Recently, we had invited Ambassador Shyam Saran to give a talk in my research colloquium, where he said that the only way in which India can compete with China is by opening trade and transit to all South Asian countries. And he said the reason is very clear, because if you try to compete with the Chinese in terms of making infrastructure, you will not be able to compete. But on the other hand, South Asia is a region. And every region has regional attributes where only a central regional power can bring those privileges to all the other countries in the region in a way where China cannot compete. So if you let more goods and services come in from the South Asian region and also let more people get into India and transit, let's say, from Bangladesh to Pakistan or from, then you will be able to provide to your neighbor the kinds of facilities that China cannot even dream of. So firstly, you have to become more inclusive. The idea of becoming more liberal and inclusive is the first step. And with that step, you will be able to bring social and economic exchange and integration, which will be the strongest bulwark that India can have against any Chinese influence. Because what is India doing right now? India is competing with $15 billion, a country which is spending many times $15 billion to get India's neighbors on its side. So it has much better capacity to spend that money. And India has to actually warm up its relations. So for example, even Nepal and even Bhutan, countries that have historic ties with India, where Indians don't need, even they are going and quoting China today. So the first thing to do is to make every neighbor comfortable about your own domestic political situation. The second thing to do is to create that infrastructure of coming together as a region. And if you're able to do this, I'm not saying that both of them are easy. Certainly they are not easy. And considering the direction that India has taken, things are going to be a little bit more challenging. But this is the way to deal with Chinese influence. Now, would the Chinese want to be less influential? No. Would the Chinese influence increase if India does not perform these roles? Yes. And why should I think otherwise? I mean, India and China have competed. I mean, India was competing with China on infrastructure in Nepal since the 1950s.
Right.
I can give you those stories.
So Professor Mukherji, you said very wisely and very well, and you echoed your message extremely well and very eloquently. Why are they not doing what you're suggesting them to do? What is the obstacle that they have?
The foremost obstacle that India has right now, I think, is ingrained in the manner in which its political design is moving. Now, the political design, in my view, is moving in a very negative direction. However, the good news is that many people in India think that it is moving in a very negative direction. I am not saying that I am not concerned about it. I am also not saying that I think that it will be easy to correct this direction. All that I'm saying is that all the hopes have not been lost. And both for the BJP and for other parties, it would be good for them to realize that numbers just can't come from dividing people, that numbers come from bringing people together. And the 5 or the 10,000-year-old history of India does not speak in any other direction than this.
Very well said.
And this is the reason why, despite such a powerful state with such an overwhelming majority, there is still such a lot of resistance.
And,
so the
and
correction
I do not know much about the political situations in India, but it seems to me, for example, the people in America fight Vice President Harris, and because she's a half Indian, trying to be inclusive in the society. But what happens in India, there's not a single member of the minority in the cabinet of BJP, as I understand. So that's a sort of a double standard people think it is.
Sure, and you see, this is the kind of politics that you have to move away from. So the fact that you don't have a single member of the Muslim community in the cabinet,
Are the Christian, are the Sikh, are the Jain?
neither Christian nor Sikh, but the Muslims are quite numerous, right? It's one of the largest Muslim populations in the world.
That is, it's the second largest after Indonesia.
Second largest Muslim population in the world. So if you do that, that means what? You are sending a message to every minority community. So for example, there was a Sikh cabinet minister who was the agriculture minister, but she had to resign after the farmers went on strike. So you will start losing people on your side. Why do you think Mr. Modi repealed the act? Part of the reason was that Hindus and Muslims as farmers were coming together. There was a Mahapanchayat in a place called Muzaffarnagar, where Muslims organized 500 eating places, langars. And much later, closer to the time of the repeal, the Sikh Gurudwara in Gurgaon, adjacent to Delhi, invited Muslims to come and offer their prayers.
Yes.
The Gurudwara Prabandhak Committee of Delhi played a very important role in organizing the farmers' protest. So community can think like that. Obviously, India is not an exclusivist country. I mean, who are these Sikhs? They produce the grains for India. Many of them fight for the country. Who are these Jats? I mean, these are the people who fill in the armed forces of the country. Now you try to divide the country on the basis of religion. Who are you going to fight whom with? So this is not sustainable in the long run. And the sooner the political class realizes, the better it is. And I am happy that you are carrying out this interview today, which is over a month after the farm laws were repealed, and a couple of more elections are coming on. So, but I agree with you that the conditions are quite distressing and one has to worry. I certainly am not very comfortable in this situation.
And people like you can make a meaningful and profound difference. And I hope you speak up, you speak out, because we love that country. We love India because we are Indians. We are in this together. So that's a little bit alarming and concerning to people like you and others. Let me change and ask you two more questions. How do you see the future trajectory of governance institutions in South Asia? Will they be strengthened or weakened, especially after the pandemic? Do you believe that it provides an opportunity for political leaders to reflect on their management style and improve the implementation of effective measures? And the question is, what reforms in terms of economic recovery and sustainable growth will be needed for future growth after the pandemic?
You see, the pandemic, in my view, and I am only much more conversant with India than I am with the other South Asian countries.
Right.
But if you read my paper in the Journal of Democracy, I argue, and there is another serious paper that I've written, not yet published, that the pandemic has really helped authoritarian propensities. No question about that, because to the extent that immediately after the pandemic, it was very difficult to come out and protest, to the extent that the parliament had to meet very quickly, and it helped in passing bills very quickly without proper negotiations. The Supreme Court was also being conducted at that time in a manner that made it very difficult for it to function normally. So the pandemic in many ways aggravated the conditions. However, in my view, the pandemic is not the source of the problem. The source of the problem is a challenge to the idea of India that we were just discussing. The pandemic just aggravated that problem. And despite the pandemic Mamata Banerjee was able to win elections in West Bengal. Of course, the elections should have been much quicker. They should have drawn fewer crowds. They should have followed much more the Biden principle than the Donald Trump principle. But it was a comprehensive loss for the BJP, which invested a lot of resources in that election. So my view is that the pandemic has certainly not helped, but the pandemic is not at the root of the problem. And people are resisting the problem despite the pandemic. What was your other question?
Let me change the conversation a little bit and change my gears to talk about the human rights and democracy. You're aware of the fact that on human rights and democracy, U.S. has recently sanctioned Bangladesh. What are your thoughts on this issue? And especially the U.S. is the place where Bangladesh sends out a lot of fabric and gets a lot of money from the United States. And, you know, do you believe that sanctioning China on human rights and democracy will be better than the Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is not a Chinese ally, but they are very close in terms of the ties with China?
Yes, I actually did a podcast for the Institute of South Asian Studies in Singapore, where I discussed the summit briefly. And my view was that the Democracy Summit was not very successful. My view also was that the Democracy Summit was a useful tool. I was discussing the summit with some leading American scholars even before Mr. Biden had won the election. So I knew that this whole idea of democracies together to fight for a certain kind of world was. And I was a part of that discussion, that it is a very good idea, even though other people were saying that, you know, ultimately values really don't matter in international relations. But what we saw in the summit was very interesting. Mr. Modi came and said all the great things without anybody challenging him. The United States invited Pakistan, but it didn't invite Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And therefore, it looked like it has become a geopolitical summit. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not what the Democracy Summit should have done. And from that perspective, I don't mind if the United States becomes self-critical of its own experience, as well as tries to take a look at other countries whose democratic experience is declining. However, chastising them in such a way, and as you rightly said, not other countries where the question of democracy doesn't even arise, is a very big problem. So I do have a problem with the way in which Bangladesh is practicing its democracy. In fact, the current Bangabandhu chair, who will be giving his lecture day after tomorrow in our institute.
Who's this fellow?
Is also writing about, you know, electoral accountability and other things. And I would think critically about Bangladesh's journey as a democracy. However, critically looking at Bangladesh's journey as a democracy does not mean that you can invite Prime Minister Modi but not Sheikh Hasina. You know, that is not the line I will take. And therefore, I agree with you. There is a need to engage with countries. There is a need for United States to showcase itself with best practices, but not in a way that makes it look more geopolitical rather than a democracy promotion exercise.
Thank you for watching. This is Frank Islam wishing you a great week.